the bill that you bring before us today has a goal of reducing by 85% the amount of solid waste. How is that measured? How's that 85% measured?
Be measured against what we're doing today. The yardstick would be on the basis of a percentage of our tonnage and volume of solid waste.
Tonnage and volume? Is it either or? How are you going to measure that?
It's all of the above.
Okay. So both metrics, both the tonnage of solid waste and the cubic yardage of solid waste,
Sure.
both need to meet that goal of 85% reduction. Okay.
There's a lot of variability. We live in a temperate climate, so when it rains, the waste that is picked up is a lot heavier. You can see this if you go to an incinerator, for example. You'll see on the day after it rained heavily, they're having a harder time burning the waste because it's wet.
Yep,
And it's also heavier.
that makes sense to me. When we're talking about recycled materials and materials that you can pull out of there to meet this weight requirement, for example, which are the heaviest that you see an opportunity to that the state really needs to capitalize on?
Well, it's really everything mixed together. It's, we don't have the waste, for the most part, segregated into materials that are separately measurable, with the exception perhaps of C&D, construction and demolition debris. And that's really rock material, a lot of cement, some metals, but metals are a small component.
So
Metals are heavy
and following your example here, there isn't an anticipation that we're going to be finding a recycling process for concrete, for example, is there?
Oh, I think concrete can be recycled. It's useful as a sub-aggregate for roads. It's useful for construction of a variety of shoreline hardening. Not that I'm a big fan of shoreline hardening, but as sea level rises, we're going to have to protect New York City from being overwhelmed by the rise of sea level. We have a variety of needs for recycled cementatious rock-like material. Yeah.
Okay, I see where you're going, and I'd consider that more of a repurpose or an upcycle than a full recycle. You're not envisioning that we're going to break concrete down to its core elements,
no,
and then recycle it into new concrete or form something else out of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that would in that process. So if you're taking chunks of concrete from a construction project, and instead of putting them in a landfill,
exactly.
You're saying both the bulk weight of that, if that's pulled out of the stream and repurposed, that would count towards your 85% goal here.
Sure.
Okay. What about glass?
Glass is very recyclable. It's the classic. Actually, the old Coke bottles from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Glass is very recyclable, and glass is actually a mineral. It's silica.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if the sponsor would continue to yield, what happens with our glass in large part today? Are we, when we throw it into a single stream bin or a source separated or whatever the recycling situation in your local municipality is, from a young age, I learned that you should rinse out the jar of spaghetti sauce real good because you wanted to make sure that was a clean product.
You are a good doobie. Yes.
Sure, and always have, and I think most members here also want to do the right thing by reducing, reusing, and recycling, and being great stewards of our land and environment.
Absolutely.
What happens to most of those bottles in the state of New York right now after we've washed them out and separated them by color or thrown them into a bin that shows up at a MRF?
Well, we have a bottle bill, so those portions of the waste stream that are glass that are covered by the bottle bill are directly back into
Through you,
the
Mr. Chair, I'm
recycling.
not talking specifically about.
You're talking about mayonnaise
I think
jars.
we're talking about recycling here, not necessarily asking manufacturers to put a deposit on it. And that's a separate bill
That's
for
a
a different
separate
day.
bill,
I'd
a
like
separate
to. I'd
issue.
like to stick to the issue at hand, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
What about those glass products that we're actually putting into the recycling stream? What ultimately happens to that glass?
They're technically able to be recycled, but right now, for the most part, they're just being landfilled. We don't have any.
One more time for the record, Mr. Speaker. Did you say that glass that we think that we're recycling is being thrown into the
I can't hear
landfill?
both at once. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I'm asking you to confirm what you just stated. The glass that we believe that we're actually recycling, that's being thrown into the landfill?
Some goes to the landfill. The glass that we are able to collect, a good deal of it is not recyclable at the present time. We don't have the kind of source separation or standards for manufacturers that give us the ability to bring that glass back into useful service. If you mix brown glass with green glass with clear glass, you end up with muddy glass. It's not very economically recyclable. We have some programs for glass in which the glass is crushed and used as part of road aggregate. That's been done experimentally. We have some examples where the glass can be used as an aggregate in the creation of cement blocks. So there's some recycling capability. I anticipate that those early experiments, some from 20 years ago, on the recycling of glass, will give guidance to the DEC. And 2.5 years from now, if we're successful in passing this, the DEC will give us the details on how glass and other materials might be recycled.
I got to imagine, through you, Mr. Speaker, I got to imagine we're going to see a great increase if this bill becomes law in the need for material recovery facilities, what we generally call MRFs. Do these material recovery facilities, do they like glass being in those facilities, or did they degrade the other actually recyclable products that could be taken to market and help with a lot of environmental goals in our baseline, which really comes down to some dollars here at the end of the day? Is glass helpful in a MRF, or is it hurtful?
You'll find different opinions at different sites, but what I have heard most often and most frequently is that glass is a real problem, that it really messes up getting crushed glass mixed in with other materials and contaminating the entire stream.
Is there something in this legislation, or do you anticipate that the Department of Environmental Conservation is going to acknowledge this fact that both glass is going into our landfills currently, even though most of us believe that we're recycling it, and then it actually degrades the rest of the recycling products that are going to market and are actually
It depends on
used?
how it's managed. We presently have pretty primitive management. So broken glass is a contaminant. Glass itself, if we're able to keep it separate, particularly if we're able to use sorting machines that separate the different colors of glass, that's very recyclable, and I anticipate that that will be something that the report from the department will focus on and give us some guidance on.
Let's talk about if you'd indulge, let's talk about the recyclability of glass, because you did mention, it's turned into cullet, could be separated by different colors and has a few different purposes. Does the concrete industry have a great interest in recycled glass cullet? Is there a good market for that? Is there an example in New York State or elsewhere, whether it's a sister state, as you put it, or some other place, where concrete companies are saying, get me that recycled glass, I would prefer that over clean sand?
I have not heard that. I anticipate that if we open a conversation, I say we, I'm really talking about the department, and in close coordination with our municipal partners, if we open a conversation with the industry, that we might find a way to enable the industry to make better use of crushed glass. They really like natural aggregate. It's what they're used to. It's what they do on a daily basis. In some cases, those industries also own their own sand quarries, and so it's going to take a little bit of work, I think, but it's certainly a doable proposition. Glass is infinitely recyclable. You can melt it, you can reform it.
I'm glad you.
Intimately.
I'm glad you brought that up.
It's silicon dioxide. Chemically, it comes from quartz, which is a mineral. It's one of the main minerals of granite. It's a very common mineral.
Right, in glass, my understanding is made from silica sand. You, in this process, are essentially saying the recycled glass in the future that we put back into this stream may be turned back into sand or a inferior product to sand. Then additional dollars and effort and energy could be put back into that sand in order to make it a glass product or for some other purpose, whether it be an aggregate for base layer. Here's my question specifically on this, and I wanted to pick on glass because when you told me that bulk weight is a big part of this goal here, glass is one of the heaviest recyclables that we have, and so in order to meet that, you could actually put a policy forward today that puts additional glass into our recycling stream, which would further degrade a lot of actually recyclable products, whether it be cardboard, which there's great demand for right now, and we're doing a pretty good job with, or whether it be all of the other things that go through a MRF, for example, have the potential of being degraded by that glass. And at the end of the day, I look at the sum total of this thing, and I say, why spend so much energy and time and effort to break this thing down when its base things are cheap? It doesn't really have a terrible environmental degradation to it when it's in a landfill. It does take up some space and have some weight. But what do we really gain when we pour so much energy back into breaking down our glass in order to turn it back into that product?
This measure doesn't speak to a formula. It calls upon the commissioner and the department to analyze the entire waste stream with a priority on reduction in volume. It's interesting that you have focused on glass. Glass is one of the most recyclable materials, as I'm sure you know, that goes into the waste stream. A more sophisticated separation process, possibly with more cooperation through education of our citizens, so that there be source separation. That would be of great assistance to our municipalities. We'll produce glass that is very recyclable and is actually preferred over gravel for the foundries that melt silica to create glass. They'd rather use a well-sorted glass material that's already gone through the process of production at least once.
Appreciate your answers. I'll go on the bill very quickly, Mr.
On the bill, sir.
So I picked on glass specifically for the reasons I stated already. It's one of the more heavy of the recyclable products. So if you're setting some imaginary metrics, which I think it's great. I mean, we always want to do things that are better for the environment. But here's the thing. We're not actually recycling glass, and it doesn't actually make sense to recycle glass. Why would you spend additional time, effort, and money and fossil fuels to truck this stuff around, source separate it, when it actually degrades recyclable products that can go to market and help the entire process? So when you do a one-size-fits-all and ignore that really And I know it's tough, right? From a young age, my mother taught me, like, rinse out that bottle. It's going into the recycling bin. We're doing the right thing for the environment. But then to learn that this stuff is actually, if we break it down into pullet, there's no market for it.